Welcome to Good Journeys Tarot. It's 78 cards in 78 weeks, our spooky edition. You'll see all of my decorations from outside are inside because I'm still testing positive for COVID, so I can't do Halloween this year. And so I decided to bring it inside with you guys. So glad to see people already popping in. I see Tony is here from Antoinette Intuitive Tarot and Jewelry, and Jennifer Ball's Witch House is here. Both who will be on upcoming episodes of 78 Cards in 78 Weeks. Excited to see them here today as well. This week, I have actually acquired a couple of decks. One is actually probably going to arrive during this broadcast. But the other was the Personal Power Oracle deck. As I mentioned several times over on Instagram, I'm trying to start working with Oracle more and see if I can't figure out how to use them effectively in my practice. But I loved this because this is something I've been trying to work on over the last several weeks, is embracing things about myself that I forget sometimes. And these all have I am statements on them. So I am powerful. I am a dreamer, And so you'll have seen some of these on Instagram already since I showed it this week. Mostly I've been trying to get rest so that I can get better. And Lady at Night of Avalon has popped in. Welcome. And today I have a guest with us, hence our spooky thing, because she's kind of known for the spooky things, right? She really doesn't need much introduction. Everybody's heard her name, right? From the Darkwood Tarot, her book, The Magic of Tarot, Tarot Diva, not to mention so many other decks she's written the Little White books for, and books that she has created. We want to welcome today Sasha Graham. Welcome, Sasha.
Hey, everybody. Hi, how are you, Rosemary?
I'm doing good. And how are you doing?
I am good. I feel like with Halloween on a Monday, I've already had about 4 days worth of Halloween. I'm about as full of chocolate and wine and parties and just costumes. I'm here in New York City. It is a Halloween explosion.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, I wish I could be out there enjoying all of that right now. It would be so much fun. Halloween's one of my favorite times of year. I love dressing up in costumes, and I'm a little bit of a spooky person, but I don't like the creepy and like bloody stuff. So like I don't do good at horror movies, but give me, like Scooby-Doo or, that kind of spooky, that's fun for me.
It's the whole,
So
that's the great
yes.
thing about Halloween, right? Or the supernatural scary stuff. It has you can go so dark and so horrifying, but then there's so much of it that's so cozy, because I think as kids, like, it's the first really fun holiday of the fall. You know what I mean? As we're like barreling towards the end of the year. So there's so many good cozy things wrapped up in it as well. But
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah,
And as
absolutely.
tarot readers, we get to have Halloween every day of the year.
Well, sure. And it's extra special for you since it's going to be your birthday tomorrow.
Will be, yes.
So happy birthday early. We're glad you could be with us.
Thank you.
Speaking of birthdays, I did a birthday special it was last week. I'm losing track of time now. And I still have a gift to send out. So if anybody knows how I can get in touch with Robin, who won the giveaway there, please let me know via any of the means in the Linktree link in the description box. So we are here today to talk about this card. So I will admit that my videos on the courts tend to be the shortest ones. And I think it's because I find so little written about them. Even though they're entire books about the courts, they're very thin books usually.
Yeah.
And none of the books actually really agree about how to read the courts. They do them slightly differently. And so I find that I don't have as much information, say, like I do with the major arcana and all of the different connections people make with those cards. And a lot of people do struggle with the courts because they're different the other cards because they're not an archetype or situational. It's a person. And I think sometimes that's probably the hardest part of life, right? Dealing with other people.
I do think yes, and I agree so much so. But I feel like the court cards are all of those aspects of our own personality that, like when you were pulling up those oracle cards earlier, saying I am this, I am that. That is very much the court card, and we cycle through court cards all day long. So when we're in a place of like feeling cozy and watching The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, we're very Page of Cups. But then if we were like to create your own Great Pumpkin, say, comic book, that would be a very King of Cups thing to do. So I do believe that there's as much depth and richness inside of the court cards as in any other major or any other card. It may just be, I don't know, it just may just be some sort of like a mental block because they tend to be costumed rather than fully decorated. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of costumes, some of the cards that I've drawn out here today, it's actually their costumes really that make them. Like in the Robin Wood, she did such a fabulous job of making their clothing appear like their elemental representation. Like here we see the waves on the king's clothing. It's gorgeous. Fish hanging around his neck. Placing him there by the seaside, which, isn't all that unusual. Fyodor Pavlov did something similar. And so we get a lot of that, the man with the crown standing by the ocean or sitting by the ocean in cards, which I think is lovely.
And that's another interesting point about court cards. They're also not typically doing something. They're just sitting there, right? And so again, that is probably that makes it tough for people maybe to like dive into what the card means. But I think most of the cards and the kings tend to be either on the ocean or on that threshold space of being at the beach, like the one that you just held up. And that's a very powerful, very distinct place that I think can be an opening for us into the card. So if we're looking at the King of Cups in the traditional sense, and literally he is sitting on a slab of concrete in the middle of an ocean, in the middle of a very like wild ocean. That is an incredibly powerful symbol to be sitting on concrete in the middle of a wild, uncharted ocean full of a crazy ship and a sea monster. And it's telling you that I think the message of that, or the way that we can dive into, especially the Rider-Waite-Smith version of the King of Cups, is the ability to kind of maintain solid ground no matter what the hell is going on around you emotionally. That is a major thing to be able to do. And I don't think, I think quite often that's the point of Buddhism and witchcraft, right? To maintain some kind of equanimity when your emotions are raging out of control, not to be caught up in them, not to be a slave to them. I think that's a very powerful thing and one of the most aspects of the King of Cups.
Absolutely. And so it speaks to this card, which is the life is like a board game, the provider of emotional support and maturity. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that seems consistent among the different books that I've read and studied, is that they see this as a emotionally mature person who's able to support others. Yes. Even amidst the chaos, like you were talking about. A lot of times in modern decks, we see this card depicted as like sea creatures. So this one is actually a literal fish sitting on a throne in the Curious Travels. Can't wait till next year for the mass market version of this deck to come out. And then here is the Trick or Treat Tarot, which I showed everybody yesterday. I just love this deck for Halloween. It's my first Halloween deck. It's the first one that spoke to me as like, okay, this is the type of Halloween I like. Everybody in costume, having a good time, playing games. I just, there's a little bit of whimsy here that's just a lot of fun with him too.
Yeah. Well,
And you,
I will say there's a little rubber ducky you see on the bottom, which just automatically like kind of lets you know you're in like a childly, like safe space. I love that card. I love the Trick or Treat Tarot. I love this deck. I'm so excited to read with it tomorrow.
And here we see mermaids in the Ellis deck, and it shows him being supported by including his children or child. Let me turn around. I think it's just one. Well, there's one, I think, but that's not something you usually see in kings in decks. Is them with their child. You might see a child in a queen card or a empress card, but this is. I thought that was really great to see a king with his children.
Well, so that's another great way to understand, right? To move into the court cards is how they represent your dad, like in the kiss. And for kings, for example, your father issues, right? So the King of Cups is like your creative and emotional, either support or issues or grapplings or things that you still need to resolve based on what your father figure was up to when you were a kid, you know? So that's a great entree in.
Yeah, absolutely. The Lost Hollow Tarot is actually based loosely on the Thoth and the RWS, and here they kind of adopt that Kraken kind of feel for the king, a little more active energy to me than you traditionally might see in a cup, but I think that comes from that Thoth influence. So he's not just idly sitting by being emotionally mature, but he's acting to help create the balance and the temperance that's needed around him. Yeah.
It's a sexy card, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And sometimes we see the like gods, like here in the Bone, Stone, and Earth Flesh, Poseidon, depicted as the King of Cups. Because obviously Poseidon's associated with the ocean or the sea, and so is this king, and so that's kind of the route that some decks have gone with it. But these are like everyday ones, and I love when you can capture an everyday scene, which is what I've been trying to do. Although with my cups, it's not been quite as clear, which you'll see towards the end of the broadcast. But a lot of people go with a fisherman or a sailor, you know, sitting in the boat, an older man in the boat. This one being the modern love, and then here that this might hurt. And I can't help but every time I see this card, think about my dad, which is really odd because I've never considered him a King of Cups. But oddly enough, when I did my photo of the day challenge, I used him as the King of Cups. And I forgot to add that to my slides to show today, but it is up on Instagram. It's a picture of him holding like, 12 to 18 roses that he's cut from his yard to go give to my mom, and which is something he does all the time. He has grown roses since we moved into that house 50 years ago, only because my mom loves them, and so she gets them 9 months of the year. She even got one like 2 days ago. As we're moving into fall, they're still coming in, and so I've always just enjoyed that, and that's why I have one tattoo so far, and that's a rose, the same one that he's been growing, and so. But I also love this whimsical one from the Slow Tarot. Him sitting on that chaotic ocean in his chair, like we often see dads depicted sitting in their lounge chair. But I mean, he seems like he's having fun despite the fact he's in the middle of the ocean. So.
I love that. With that story about your father bringing your mother roses and the King of Cups, like that's a very kind of grown up Knight of Cups thing to do, right? The seducer, the suitor, and then looking at that kind of mature version of that, you know, that would plant an entire, not just bring a rose, but plant an entire rose garden.
Right.
They love.
Yeah, he's definitely seen oftentimes as the mature lover, maybe more loyal than, say, the knight might be, who is still a little maturing and a little fickle at times. And I love how in the Santa Morte they made the eyes and the skeleton's hearts on the cups. So it just was a nice little touch for me. And they actually did it with some of the other cards as well, like the swords or spade shaped eyes and that type of thing, which I thought was kind of cool. But it's basically just a skeleton dressed in blue. But for some reason, I still love this card, mainly because of the way they did the eyes and the shapes of little hearts, hints at that emotion and that lover inside of him and that type of thing.
And he's devouring whatever's in his cup. You don't
Oh
normally
yes,
see
yes,
that either.
he's thirsty for sure, for sure. So I only have three more. These are probably some of my favorites. Did you have some other cards there that you were going to share with us?
Yeah, so I pulled out the King of Cups from my Tarot of the Haunted House. And I want and what I love about this particular version of the king is I placed him. This is a very specific swimming pool, actually, which is in the castle, William Randolph Hearst's castles in San Simeon. And so this is his indoor underground swimming pool. And so I love the idea that you might be in the water swimming toward this king of cups who is sort of like the master of art. And that's why we see those Roman Greco statues of ideal beauty behind him and those incredible wings. Imagine if you could be wrapped up in those wings, embraced by those rings, embraced by that king, that imaginative quality that could see and love and be inspired and inspire you. I love the idea of the King of Cups as kind of the creative genius, you know, and what that might feel like to just swim right up to him. Yeah. So I brought that card. And then in that same kind of like exciting but almost oppositional, I love the Prisma Visions Tarot. And I love how he's got his back to you. He's just working his own magic, though. You know, he's just lighting up his universe. And I think that creativity is something that so many of us, I know I certainly struggle to complete things, to kind of stand in my creative power, to believe fully creatively in the visions and the ideas that I have. And that idea that this King of Cups has actually just kind of been responsible for everything that comes behind him, and is strong, but is also like vapor, could also disappear in a moment. And I think that's an evocative statement for actually the quality of life. We get so we can get so mired down in our artistic issues, but at the end of the day, does it matter? It only matters if we like give them life. So yeah, I love that. I love the Prisma Visions. And then the other two cards you already pulled up, Trick or Treat and the Rider Waite Smith. So
wonderful. Yeah, so this is the Tarot of the Toiling Hands, and I like the kind of surreal feeling of this one with the head splitting open and the flying fish flying out. It just kind of hints at that idea that this can be an intuitive person, you know. They are empathic, and they might actually see things that we don't necessarily, even in ourselves. And the name that they gave this card was the Sovereign of Diplomacy and Compassion. And I do want to talk about that idea of diplomacy with this card for a second, because for me, I've always associated diplomacy with the air suit, because that's your thinkers, your people with knowledge, right? And so I've always thought of a diplomat as someone who uses their knowledge to reach a conclusion that will work for everybody. Whereas a lot of people associate this card with diplomacy because of the temperate nature of it and their ability to basically counsel or serve as a therapist, perhaps, for people. What are your thoughts on diplomacy in the courts?
So there's two things in general about the court cards. So when you're talking about kingship, queenship, royalty in any way, Diplomacy is one of the forefront things because a king or a queen or a prince or a princess is ruling a particular kingdom. So diplomatic relations are going to be important, and we can use that diplomatic metaphor for the way in which we are relating to other people, sharing our ideas, inspiring others, inviting us into our life. But because the Suit of Cups also is the realm of creativity and the imagination, it also fits beautifully with the idea of a cultural attaché. Now, my great great uncle was actually appointed the cultural attaché of Chile in London in about, I think it was, I don't know, right after the war. But anyway, a cultural attaché is someone is in the diplomatic corps, and they act as someone who kind of puts together parties and gatherings and brings creative people together for the good, right, of that country. So I love the idea that the King of Cups would kind of have the most phenomenal artistic gatherings, and so I feel like the ideas of diplomacy kind of equally move out amongst all of the court cards in a sense.
Sure, sure. And it's interesting what you were just saying about this. It kind of relates to how I feel about creativity in the court cards because I've always seen the wands as the artist and the cups as those who appreciate the art,
Mhm.
who, who can, who enjoy the aesthetic kind of instead of the actual artists themselves. But I know
Mhm.
other people see it just the opposite. They see the cups as the artists themselves. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting. Good to hear someone else saying that those traits can kind of float between different court cards, because there's
Yeah.
more to them than just one thing.
It's so important not to hold a binary idea of what tarot cards mean, I think, and especially even in what like a king and a queen means, right? This idea, like, or the ability to like just hold them both equally. I always think of as energetically and elementally, fire is that thing which provokes whatever it is we do, whether it's creativity or bookkeeping, right? And then that quality of cups, that quality of elemental water is our ability to filter through all of the emotional qualities of those things, all of the compassionate qualities of those things. Yeah. So
Great. I have one more card, and this is the Sasorabito card. I don't know. For me, this just kind of speaks to me as like, okay, let me pour some tea, and I'll listen to you. That kind of counselor therapist feel that I kind of like to see in this card.
mhm.
It's like sit with Grandpa and talk to me, kind of thing, which is kind of how I see this card. A lot of times is the one who will listen and who can provide wise counsel because they're emotionally mature and they're not dealing with all of the emotions you have tied to the situation, right? So to speak. So yeah, I just kind of love that. There's something about that simple pouring of the coffee that just hit me as that scene.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things I've tried to do as I've been working on my cards is to create scenic courts so that I kind of like get a feeling of who they are versus just a person in with surrounded by their element, right? So like we have the king surrounded by the water, or with the knight on the horseback with their the representation of their suit.
Mhm.
Um, and similarly for the pages, when we talked about the Page of Wands of several weeks ago now, it's one I've always struggled with in the Smith Waite because to me it just looks like somebody standing there with a stick. Because I didn't get the whole announcing thing that was supposed to be going on there, from that particular image. And so I kind of want to include something that, like you said earlier, is a little more scenic that draws in some of that information apart from, okay, this is a person in this suit at this kind of stage of life kind of thing. Oh yeah, great term, Tony. She says a more symbol, more less symbol, more essence. So is basically what I'm going for. Uh, Okay, so the last card I have is actually to talk about symbols. It's interesting. I don't have you seen Jennifer Steely's deck,
Mhm.
the Tarot Disassembled,
Ooh,
um, in which she takes various symbols and pulls them out. I believe she's a graphic designer. She will be here next week to help with this. I met her at Northwest Tarot Symposium. And so she pulls out different symbols as the focus of the card, and her guidebook walks through all of these symbols, which is really fun. And she has some really great stories at Northwest Tarot Symposium about various foods in the tarot, which were really great. But what's interesting is there's always at least one symbol on here that I've never noticed in the RWS deck. And in this case, it's a snake.
snake.
And I never have really thought about it or noticed it, but I think what she's referring to
Oh, she's
is if you
referring
look
to
at the
the sea
crown,
creature.
or if you look at the crown there, the bottom part of the crown is looks almost like a serpent slithering across the bottom of it.
Totally could be.
Yeah, but she brings in this idea of renewal or growth with this card, which obviously water is nourishing, right? And can grow and causes growth, right? So
Yeah.
that's obviously something I never would have thought about. But yeah, emotional growth and maturity is definitely something that comes out of the card.
And even the
But
fact
I never thought
that
about
that,
that
that
snake.
the father figures pattern that for us. I mean, again, going back to that idea of mothers and fathers, so much of our emotional patterning comes from watching the people who raise us, you know?
So in her video on the Kings, Benabel Wynn talks about the creature, which in most places is referred to as a dolphin. And then the boat over here. And she tells this story that was, I guess, popular when Waite was creating the deck about um basically a boat with a dolphin in it or a fish in it on the opposite side was about moving along a spiritual path, and then the scepter being on the side with the boat here supported that the divine supporting that growth on the spiritual path. So a lot of people will associate this card to say a spiritual leader, a shaman, a cleric, someone that you might go to for counsel
Mhm.
in spiritual matters. And definitely, spirituality is something that I associate with water, just like emotions, because I think a lot of times our spiritual selves are associate or relate to our emotions. You know, they help us keep our emotions under control. They guide us to, you know, when we have those emotional difficult times. And that's why I think people go to their religious leaders when they are in part of a faith of some kind. And so I thought that was kind of a interesting connection that she brought out in her video on the card was about the spirituality of this person, because there were a lot of people who said, you know, this might in fact Waite defines this person as maybe a lawyer, a business person, or a clergy person.
Mhm.
And I kind of related to that because I was a minister for 13 years, and so I have always viewed ministers differently than how people view the Hierophant in the tarot. You know, I've viewed them as a chaplain, as someone you can go to who listens, who can give you advice, but they're not there to like rule over you or dictate how you live your life. And that's kind of how I feel about this card as well, uh, so to speak. So, do you read reversals?
Yes, all the
Yeah,
time.
okay. Some people do, some people don't. I'm one of those that, you know, when I see the card, I'll think about which seems more appropriate given the situation, or if it accidentally comes up, then. But I don't shuffle reversals in. Like that's just not a thing that I do. But I like to talk about the shadow side of the card,
Yeah.
and I think the most common thing that I heard was basically, you know, this is going to be a self-centered person. You know, they're going to be more focused on themselves than everyone else, which is kind of what you get from the upright. Um, and so in that way, they might also be a little manipulative, you know, because they're wanting more for themselves than for like those around them. How do you see it in the shadow side?
So I see, well, in terms of working with reversals,
Mhm.
Looking at the shadow side of the card or working with the shadow side of any tarot card is just one way in which to use a reversal. And it's actually one that
Mhm.
I advocate in the Darkwood Tarot in terms of when you're doing shadow work. Definitely go out of your way from time to time to use reversals as a shadow issue. So when I'm talking about how you might use a tarot card as a shadow issue, you would want to flip that card literally into understanding how you are exhibiting what would be considered the shadow side of that card. So, how you're embodying that in your life. So, in a very general understanding of the King of Cups upright, we would think, okay, if I'm embodying the King of Cups in its upright position, I am an artistic mentor and I am gathering my people together and I am creative and delicious and wonderful. But if you flip that on its head as a reversal and move into the darker qualities of what that would mean, it would mean stealing someone else's creative idea, crushing someone else's creative idea, taking a good, delicious, juicy situation and stirring it up like the sea monster on that card. So then you would look at that reversal as trying to go, all right, when was the last time I actually did that? When was the last time I crushed somebody's creative idea? And that's the whole point of shadow work or the shadow side of the card, right? It's looking at those parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily want to acknowledge and kind of calling ourselves out on our bad behavior because we're so quick. I just as anybody else to look at the cards as the good parts of us, but we're not going to grow if we're not looking at the not so nice parts. And we don't come to tarot to look at what we already know. If we're not learning something new or discovering something new when we're reading the tarot, what's the point? That's why we exist in the darkness. That's why tarot card readers light candles in darkness and kind of exist in this netherworld, because in theory we should be able to embrace the darkness as well as the light. So yeah, I think the shadow side of the King of Cups is a terrifying figure. It's a father figure, right? We're constantly still, as I've been pointing out, working out our mom and our dad issues, but we get to a certain point in our lives and we're the mom and dad. So you can look at the shadow side of the Knight of Cups is how maybe you have been creatively destructive, not only to your own children, but maybe to your friends, to your partners, to your family. When have you used the weight of your emotion to drown someone, metaphorically, or realistically? So when you could look at and think of that one card that you held up where the King of Cups was like drinking, when have you gone overboard, literally like being drunk on your own emotion? How often do we let our emotion carry us away? The shadow side of the King of Cups is so rich, thick, and full of all of this stuff. Like you could spend a year deconstructing it, and how you embody it or have been affected by it, and still like have 10 more years of kind of work to go on it. So yeah.
Well, I think that's true of the tarot in general. Any one card you could study forever and find something new about it. And that's one of the reasons I've been pulling cards from various decks and examining them along with my reading and whatnot, because everyone has slightly a different take, and it's not that any of them are wrong. It's that there's all kinds of information there that we can gain from the various correspondences and symbols and connections, and not just from the one card without associating it with all of the others in your spread, right?
Yes. And I'm so glad you said that thing. There is no wrong. There is no wrong in tarot, no wrong.
Sure. Well, let's take a look at what I did. So, what I do for those who are new to 78 Cards in 78 Weeks, and Sasha, who hasn't been with us before, is I'm basically using Creative Commons imagery to mock up what I'd like the card to look like. And early on, I was just picking random images that were the thing I wanted to put in the card. And then some people were like, oh, will we be able to get a copy of it? And I was like, well, I'm going to have to do a little bit harder work on this now to make them presentable. So I've started trying to make the images more consistent. And one of the ways I do that is I use silhouettes for the people, because what I want to do is find eventually an illustrator to illustrate them for me, because some of these cards are actually scenes in my life, and there's specific people that I want to see in the cards. And the other reason I'm using silhouettes is because with Creative Commons imagery, different images are in different art styles. And so by using silhouettes, I can actually turn them black and then they all look similar, even if one of them had been watercolor and one of them had been line drawings before. So just that's kind of a background of what I've been doing. This week, I did not go through a process of creating multiple versions of the card. I showed Tony my first draft in the Good Journeys into Tarot Facebook group, and she was like, well, I immediately got King of Cups, so I guess it's good enough, right? And so I wanted to start by showing the others in the Cups family that I've done. I have previously completed the page, which I'm calling the Dreamer, and it may change. Now that I've done the King, I'm looking at it and going, well, maybe I want to put her by the ocean like the others, as I did with, say, the Knight. This was the Knight, which I called the Charmer. And as you can see, I've added a little bit of fantasy into my cups, that idea of creativity, that kind of open-mindedness. So here she's wearing her little wings, and here there's kind of a unicorn, that kind of imagination that I kind of wanted to add for romance here in this card. Although I think I'm going to be going back and changing who this character is. Originally, it was going to be an adolescent male, but now I'm thinking it's going to be a female. I may just add a ponytail to the existing person, but I have a reason for that. When I get around to doing all of the courts together, I'll show everybody what I've done. But this is the King that I created. Very simply, it's based on the Knight. I put it in the same setting where the sun is on the horizon. Maybe it's the sunset, maybe it's the sunrise, and he's sitting there basically listening, right? And it's probably one of the more simple cards that I've done, and who knows if it will probably change or not. But I kept having this idea in my head of this guy in a man bun just sitting there with his hands in his lap, listening, to you as you talk about your problems. And where do we more often reflect on things than by the ocean, right? I mean, especially at sunset or sunrise. I know when I'm with people and I'm sitting by the sun, by a fire, or just watching the sunrise or the sunset, we contemplate life, right? That was my idea anyway. So I always invite my guests, as well as those who are in the chat, to give their thoughts on it, any ideas to improve or change or expand it, because it'll change up until I print my first copy of the deck next spring. So, but that's kind of the direction I'm headed at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. It reminds me of Wellfleet in Cape Cod.
Letting the tides turn.
Yeah, letting the tides come in and out, being present. I mean, because there's something very, I think maybe what they're getting at too is there's something very solid at the way he's sitting there, yet the tides are so fluid. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that I added the seagulls just so it was obvious that we were at the ocean. Mm-hmm. But then I think about the noise that they often create, that chaos, and see how calm he is even in that chaos. Like you had mentioned earlier with the Smith-Waite card. And so I kind of liked that. Yeah. So that's where we're headed right now with the King of Cups.
Cool.
So before we draw next week's card, did anyone in the chat wear the Halloween costume? I threw on my witch's hat because I never get to wear it. I had it custom made, and then the pandemic hit and I didn't get to take it anywhere. So yeah, so let's see. I'm going to put the link for StreamYard in the chat for you guys. Whoops. And if anybody actually wore the costume, pop in real quick. And while we wait to see if anybody does that, we will do our drawing. So I counted for Sasha earlier, and we have 20 cards left. And so next week, Jennifer Steedley of the Tarot Disassembled, this deck right here, will be with us. In fact, my bad. I did actually put her in here to show you. There she is. Will be coming and talking with us about the card that we're about to draw. And then the week after that, Jennifer Ball from Jennifer Ball's Witch House will be here. And then we also have Barrett Urmi from that I met at StarCon last year coming the week after that. And then we're going to finish November with, I want to say, Jason Daly from Hawaii. Yeah, and then we'll start again in December with some more guests. So I'm currently booking for January, February, and March. If anybody is interested, you can go ahead and drop me a line and pick a date before anybody else. I do have several people who agreed to come on at Northwest Tarot Symposium, and I'll be emailing them about dates in the spring. But we're getting so close. Only 20 cards left. The end of March, I'll be done, and then I'll begin working on getting a test print so I can see if I like it before I give anybody the print on demand link. So let's see. Our card for next week with Jennifer is going to be, another card. It's going to be the Page of Swords. Yeah, so I'm going to be working with that card. A little bit of whimsy there in this card to me, always, because of the way they're holding the sword. It's and there's kind of wind blowing and stuff. This is one of those cards that for the longest time I thought it was a female, and it really got me thinking about the courts and how they really could represent anyone. Was this card. So kind of looking forward to talking about that and seeing what interesting symbols Jennifer will pull out of it. Tony says she's in her PJs. Okay, well, that's fine. I won't give anything away today. But thank you all for showing up. Sasha, is there anything coming up for you that you would just love for our viewers to know about?
Yes, tarot specific would be, well, there's two things actually. One, I'm going to be presenting at the Kingston Tarot Lenormand conference in November. That's with Marilyn Shannon. And there's a slew of other wonderful teachers. You can go in person or you can attend virtually. So if you would love an immersive tarot weekend, head on over to sashagraham.com on my event page. It'll take you right into the Kingston Lenormand Tarot Conference, or you could just Google that. So yeah, so that's coming up in November. If anybody happens to be watching in Massachusetts or New England, I will be at Circles of Wisdom Bookstore in Methuen, Massachusetts. For an entire weekend, actually. I'm going to do a Friday night magic class and then a full day long shadow workshop on Saturday. That's the weekend right before Thanksgiving. If any horror fans are watching, I'm heading to Ohio to finish making my horror movie. We're reshooting some scenes for a horror movie called Trivial, which will be out next year, streaming on Amazon and all movie platforms. And if anybody is local or coming to New York City, I host 2 monthly events that I would love to invite you to. One is Spirited Away Psychic and Paranormal event at the Barrows Intense Tasting Room, which is full of psychics and tarot readers and mediumship circles and crafts and clothes. It's super fun, delicious, tasty cocktails. And then I also host it's now a bi-monthly live storytelling event, Ghost Stories by the Fire. We're now doing them in Brooklyn and in the West Village on Christopher Street at Rock Bar. So if any of you guys would ever like to come be a featured storyteller, tell a spooky supernatural story, or just come and join in the fun, we would love to have you there. And you guys can find all of this information at sashagraham.com.
Yes, and that link is in the description box below if you can't remember it, despite how easy it is, right? And you also can find out everything that's going on with me at the Linktree link below in the comments as well. Sorry, yes, in the description box. That's what it's called, the description box. I want to thank Sasha for being here and for everyone who chimed in and was present today. Thank you so much. Until next time, everyone, good journeys.